Another story I did want to hear your opinion on that I know you had some thoughts on was this interesting story in the American Prospect, which is a great paper about the UFC.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how Trump is really, really leaning into the UFC right now, and I think that it's because of the COVID framing. So Dana White has been for anybody who's not I'm like a low-key degenerate. I'm a mixed martial arts fan. I really like combat sports. I've been a fan of Muay Thai for a while. So I just I'm a fan of it as a sport. I'm not a fan of the company or the UFC president Dana White. Who's obviously a huge Trump supporter and a huge piece of shit. But the UFC has basically built their brand since the COVID-19 pandemic as being the brand against COVID. The president Dana White famously refuses to wear a mask anywhere. He like refused to be in the auditorium when the fights were happening because he couldn't get them to let him not wear a mask because he wasn't a fighter. So he watched it from his hotel room, like just huge, like virtue signaling from the right. Like they put all their fights on an island outside Abu Dhabi in order to make sure that they can keep, pumping out fights or whatever. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but it has been massively virtue signaling to kind of like posture with the president. Colby Covington, UFC welterweight, recently fought Tyron Woodley, a former UFC welterweight championship, pieced him up pretty good. Beat him pretty bad, which is a bummer. I was cheering for Tyron. I loved him when he was champ. He's a Missouri guy, so I always cheered for Tyron. But Colby Covington's a Make America Great Again piece of shit guy, and Trump's really been leaning into that. Every time that Colby Covington fights, he gets a call from the White House. Trump, not this most recent fight, actually, I believe it was when Trump fought when Covington fought. It would have been whoever he fought right before he fought Tyron Woodley. I can't remember right now. It's playing. Trump went to that fight. It was a big deal. Colby Covington was at the presidential debate, not wearing a mask, wearing his Make America Great Again hat. I noticed when I was watching the debate, you could just see him in the crowd. And I think it's interesting how Trump and the UFC have really kind of band together in this like anti-COVID, pro-America, just kind of like, and it makes sense, right? Because the UFC's demographics are really big amongst Trump supporters, unfortunately. Combat sports isn't really popping off amongst the left. And it's just been this really interesting thing. And one of the things that I think is also an interesting dynamic that's going on in the UFC right now is there's been a lot of conversation about fighter pay and, whether or not there would be an organization unionizing of the UFC fighters. Trump's also been using current UFC welterweight rival of Colby Covington, actually, George Masvidal, to be campaigning for him down in Florida because George Masvidal is a Cuban American, and he's basically been campaigning alongside Donald Trump, making the case against socialism.
I think he went on a tour with Trump's son, actually, Don.
Yeah, it was Donald Trump Jr., I believe.
Yeah. And this
either way, campaigning for the president.
I'm not as, huge into UFC and MMA as you are, but I do admit that when it comes to combat sports, I would much rather watch UFC than basically any of the, their competition as far as wrestling or boxing or whatever that, just because it does come off as so much more raw and real. If I'm going to watch people fight, I want to watch them actually fight with actual potential consequences.
Right. And that's the fact that go ahead.
And it's funny that, down here it quotes previous Republican candidate John McCain, and he called it human cockfighting in an earlier statement.
Right, yeah, I actually wanted to bring that up because there's an interesting bit of UFC history that doesn't make any sense that actually directly involves John McCain. John McCain was a huge pain in the ass for getting UFC regulation in the United States, and he's actually the primary reason why in the UFC today it's illegal to do a 12-6 elbow. In the UFC, you can't do an elbow from 12 to 6 because of those like tacky, like Taekwondo Kung Fu movies from back in the day where people would drop their elbow and like all the shit would break. So it's like anybody who knows anything about fighting knows that you're not going to get that much more power going this way than you are doing at a slight angle, which is completely legal in the UFC. It can be at any angle as long as it's not 12 to 6. And it's because of like John McCain and this like coalition that he formed in the Senate that was like fearmonger about it.
I think that's funny and kind of emblematic too, because as I said, John McCain was a previous Republican nominee, and I think this kind of just symbolizes the divide between like a John McCain type and a Donald Trump, which is that Donald Trump understands and is more tapped into the working class people. He understands that of course people want to fucking watch MMA, whereas John McCain's over here virtue signaling and pretending like this is some moral issue, this evil sweeping the country or whatever. Meanwhile, he's never met a war that he didn't love or support, or one of the biggest warmongers to ever grace the United States Senate. Meanwhile, he's over here super concerned about MMA, and like you said, didn't even really have a real grasp or understanding of actual combat sports. So I think that is in some ways kind of emblematic how, Trump was able to tap into that more populist instinct, because as you alluded to, the MMA is huge among the MAGA people, and a lot of those are, working class. And I'm not trying to be, classist or rude or anything, but that is just the case. So yeah, I think it's funny.
And I think it's so interesting that goes back to one of it. Really, I think the reason why, I mean, Dana White and Donald Trump had a relationship that predates Trump's presidency, right? So for everybody who maybe not familiar, the UFC is primarily based in Vegas, but when they were getting their start, they also had a lot of fights in Atlantic City because it's cheaper and there's lax regulation there. And Trump had the Taj casino. So they kind of had a working relationship based on hosting fights back in the day, and I think that's a little bit of a you scratch my back, I'll scratch mine. I remember now. I couldn't earlier remember the fight that Trump had attended that Colby Covington had fought at. I don't know why it slipped my mind. It was his title fight not too long ago against Kamaru Usman when he got his ass whooped.
Yeah, I remember that one. Like I said, I don't follow this stuff like you do, but I do remember when Colby Covington got his ass kicked, because I remember I wanted that to happen because he is such an obnoxious, Trumpster. I guess that's me feeding into the.
I mean, I think his whole brand is that he's a heel kind of UFC guy. So I don't know how much of it he really subscribes into, but he definitely makes his money off of the Trump MAGA brand. I
mean, yeah, it's definitely a smart business move considering the demographics of the UFC.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's
yeah. Anyway, it is funny, and like I said, it just kind of Trump is such a maximalist president. Of course he's going to embrace MMA and UFC. That's it's just obvious. They go together. And of course he was the wrestling president too. He did a couple WrestleMania events where he was like the host, and I mean he's always kind of been in this world of
I mean, it makes sense though. His personality is very WWE friendly.
That's what I mean by he's such a maximalist president. It just makes sense that he would be into something like this, and he would be kind of rubbing elbows or whatever the expression is with Dana White, who of course in and of himself is kind of a ridiculous character.
One of the U.S. billionaires also, if you weren't familiar.
Wow, that does not surprise me. And yeah, of course, these billionaires are all going to get along. At the end of the day, that's what Donald Trump's policies are really actually serving. And so, of course, someone like Dana White is going to support Trump. And you often see the mask slip off these super rich folks that pretend to be somewhat, progressive, because the minute when their taxes, rates are in question, of course they're going to go with the Trump or whoever.
I won't give Dana White that credit. Never in his life has he masqueraded as a progressive. He's always been public about how piece of shit he is.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, at least he doesn't pretend. You have to give them credit for that. I guess at least we know up front their actual beliefs. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting story.
Not like Mark Zuckerberg, who fancies, and all the, Elon Musk, who fancy themselves these liberal bastions.
Didn't Mark Zuckerberg make a big campaign donation to Trump or something?
He probably did. Elon Musk damn near confirmed that he authorized he was involved in the coup in Bolivia.